In the rolling hills of the Santa Ynez Valley, California, a landscape of serene and ancient oaks, of golden grasses and sophisticated vineyards, there is a place that should not exist. It is a wound in the fabric of the expected, a pocket of architectural schizophrenia. From the road, if you know where to look, you can glimpse the gables of an English Tudor manor, a style born of damp northern climates, now baking under the relentless California sun. Beside it, stranger still, the skeletal silhouette of a Ferris wheel stands sentinel against the sky, a silent monument to a carnival that has long since ended. This place was once known to the world as Neverland, a name borrowed from a children's story, a fantasy of eternal youth, of lost boys and a benevolent flying leader. But this was no storybook. This was 2,700 acres of manicured reality, a kingdom built not of imagination, but of steel, marble, and staggering wealth. A place with its own steam train, its own zoo, its own amusement park, its own fire department. It was a self-contained universe, meticulously designed and fiercely protected. But what was it? A home? A playground? A gilded prison? Who was the man who conceived of such a paradox, a place of profound innocence and later of profound suspicion? What was he trying to build, and more importantly, what was he trying to escape? The story of this house is not one of architecture, but of psychology. It is the story of a dream so powerful it bent reality to its will, and the tragedy that occurred when reality inevitably bent back. We think we know the story of Neverland, but the truth lies not in the headlines, but in the silence of its empty halls, in the rust on its silent rides, in the very bones of a house built to stop time itself. To understand the dream, you must first understand the wound. The architect of this fantasy was Michael Jackson, but before he was the king of pop, a global icon whose every move was scrutinized, he was a small boy from Gary, Indiana. He was born in 1958 into a small two-bedroom house, crowded with 9 siblings, and the immense, unyielding ambition of their father, Joseph Jackson. His childhood was not a time of scraped knees and bicycle rides. It was a relentless, grueling apprenticeship. It was rehearsals in cramped living rooms, performances in smoky clubs, and a constant crushing pressure to be perfect. Joseph was a man forged in the harsh realities of his time, a former boxer and crane operator who saw in his talented children a path out of the steel mills and toward a different kind of life. He drilled them with a discipline that bordered on terror. Michael, the prodigy, the boy with the voice of an angel and the feet of a dancer, bore the heaviest burden. He would later speak of this time not with the nostalgia of a cherished memory, but with the quiet trauma of a survivor. He spoke of loneliness, of watching other children play from the window of a recording studio, of a father whose love was conditional, measured in successful performances and record sales. He was a child star, but a child in name only. He was the breadwinner, the focal point of a multi-million-dollar enterprise before he had even entered his teens. The world saw a phenomenon, a dazzlingly talented boy who sang of love and joy. But behind the curtain, that boy was working, always working. There was no Peter Pan, no lost boys, only contracts, deadlines, and the ever-present shadow of his father's disapproval. This was the foundational void in his life. He had fame. He had adoration from millions, but he had been robbed of the one thing he could never buy back, his childhood. And so began a lifelong quest, not merely to remember it, but to reconstruct it. As his fame exploded in the 1980s, becoming a force of nature unlike anything the world had seen before, his wealth grew to mythological proportions. The album Thriller did not just sell records, it reshaped the entire music industry, breaking down racial barriers on television and setting a new standard for artistic ambition. He was no longer just a star, he was a planet, with his own gravitational pull, his own atmosphere. And with this power came the means to do the impossible. The money was never the point. The money was the raw material. It was the clay he would use to sculpt the world he was denied. He began collecting the artifacts of innocence. He surrounded himself with Disney memorabilia, with statues of children at play, with chimpanzees and llamas. His homes became proto-Neverlands, early experiments in creating a sanctuary. But they were not enough. He needed more than a collection. He needed a kingdom. The catalyst for this grand project was a union, not of marriage, but of vision. In the late 1980s, his creative partnership with the composer and producer Quincy Jones had reached its zenith. They had created a trilogy of albums, Off the Wall, Thriller, and Bad, that defined an era. This collaboration was a merger of ambitions. Jones, the seasoned jazz maestro, provided the sophisticated framework and musical credibility. Jackson provided the raw, incandescent talent and the almost supernatural instinct for what the public craved. This partnership validated him as a mature artist, an adult genius. And yet, the more his adult success was cemented, the more desperately he seemed to yearn for the opposite. The success gave him the power to reject the very adult world that had crowned him king. He could now afford to build a world on his own terms, a world that answered not to the demands of the music industry, but to the whispers of a lonely boy from Gary, Indiana. In 1988, he found the canvas for his masterpiece, a 2,700-acre property in the Santa Ynez Valley called the Sycamore Valley Ranch. He paid a reported $17.5 million for it, a staggering sum at the time. He would spend many times that amount transforming it. He renamed it Neverland, a public declaration of intent. This would not be a ranch. It would be a sovereign nation of childhood. The very act of building Neverland was a statement of radical control. This was not a man building a house. This was a king founding a nation. It was conceived from the outset not as a private residence, but as a total environment, a strategic tool designed to filter the world. It was a fortress against the judgment of adults, the intrusion of the media, and the relentless march of time. It was a stage on which he could perform the role he always wanted, not the global superstar, but the benevolent and magical leader of a tribe of children. The architecture of Neverland is a perfect map of its creator's psyche. The choice of a grand English Tudor-style mansion for the main residence was deeply significant. This was not the native architecture of California. It was an import, a deliberate fantasy. The style evokes fairy tales, medieval romance, and the storybook illustrations of a European childhood he never had. It was an attempt to ground his fantastical vision in a sense of history, however artificial. The house, with its half-timbered facade, its leaded glass windows, and its sprawling 13,000 square feet, was designed to look like a place where time had stopped long ago. But the house was merely the castle. The kingdom was the land around it. And here, the psychology becomes even more explicit. Jackson did not suggest the idea of childhood with subtle gestures. He built it, literally. He installed a full-scale amusement park, a magnificent custom-made Ferris wheel, a high-flying spinning ride called the Zipper, a Sea Dragon pirate ship, a carousel populated with exotic hand-carved animals. These were not toys. They were industrial-grade machines of joy, the kind you would find at a state fair, now standing in a private backyard. The message was unmistakable. Happiness can be engineered, innocence can be manufactured. Then there was the zoo. Jackson's affinity for animals was well known. He saw them, perhaps, as he saw children, as pure, non-judgmental beings, incapable of the cynicism and betrayal he associated with the adult world. Neverland became a private menagerie of elephants, giraffes, orangutans, and a famous chimpanzee named Bubbles. These creatures were not just pets. They were citizens of his kingdom, living proof that he could create a peaceable world where all innocent things, human and animal, could live in harmony under his protection. And connecting it all was the railroad. He built 2 separate train lines, complete with a fleet of steam locomotives and a stunning Disney-inspired train station. The station itself was a work of art, with a magnificent floral clock out front, its hands perpetually moving but always telling the same time, Neverland time. The train was more than transportation. It was a powerful symbol of controlled passage. It represented a journey into magic and away from the ordinary. You did not simply drive to Michael Jackson's house. You arrived at a station, boarded a train, and were carried into another reality. He controlled the point of entry. He controlled the entire experience. The sheer scale of the construction was a testament to an obsession that dwarfed mere ambition. The logistics were staggering. It required armies of landscapers, engineers, animal handlers, and maintenance crews. The cost ran into the tens of millions, then soared higher. A full-time staff of over 100 people was needed to keep the kingdom running, to keep the popcorn machines full, the rides polished, and the gardens immaculate. This was not the extravagance of a man showing off his wealth. This was the desperate, meticulous world-building of a man trying to heal a wound by constructing a paradise on top of it. One of the most telling architectural features was the stark contrast between the public and private spaces. The grounds of Neverland were a public spectacle, designed for crowds, for laughter, for constant motion. But the main house, while vast, had an almost monastic quietness to it. It was filled with heavy wooden furniture, dark oil paintings, and life-sized statues of children and characters from fiction. It was less a home and more a museum of lost innocence. This contrast was the core of Neverland's duality, the loud, joyful carnival outside and the quiet, solitary melancholy within. It was a party to which the host felt he could never truly belong, a paradise built for others to enjoy while he watched from the window of his lonely castle. For a time, the magic worked. The golden age of Neverland, from the late 1980s through the early 1990s, was the dream made manifest. The great gates, adorned with golden cherubs and the crest of a young king, opened to a steady stream of visitors. The primary guests were children, busloads of them, children from inner-city schools, children with terminal illnesses, children from disadvantaged backgrounds all over the world. For them, a day at Neverland was a literal dream come true. Imagine being one of those children. You pass through gates that look like they belong to a fairy tale palace. You board a steam train that chugs past fields where giraffes and zebras graze. You arrive at a pristine station and are greeted by the smell of fresh popcorn and cotton candy. Before you lies a world of unlimited fun. Free rides, free food, a movie theater playing cartoons on a loop, an ice cream parlor, a zoo filled with exotic animals, and at the center of it all, the benevolent, almost mythical figure of Michael Jackson himself, a shy, soft-spoken man who seemed more comfortable with children than with adults. The estate was a flawless machine of fantasy. Everything was curated to perfection. The lawns were impossibly green, the flower beds a riot of color, the brass on the carousel gleaming in the sun. The sounds were of laughter, of calliope music from the merry-go-round, of the joyful screams from the sea dragon as it swung high into the air. It was a symphony of manufactured bliss conducted by a master. The house was serving its purpose. It was a stage for philanthropy, a platform for a unique kind of charity that offered not just money, but magic. This was the peak of Jackson's influence, the moment when his strange and singular vision seemed to be validated. Neverland elevated his status from a mere pop star to something more, a modern-day Willy Wonka, a mysterious and generous benefactor. He attracted the very people he had always felt alienated from. Elizabeth Taylor, a fellow child star who understood the pressures of a stolen youth, became a close friend and a frequent guest. Other celebrities, dignitaries, and even former presidents made the pilgrimage. Neverland was a symbol of a power so immense it could create its own weather, its own rules, its own reality. It was a testament to the idea that if you are rich and famous enough, you can build a better world. But even at the height of its glory, a quiet melancholy haunted the kingdom. The sheer size of Neverland was a paradox. It was built for connection, yet it created a profound isolation. The 2,700 acres were a buffer, a moat of land separating its owner from the world he so distrusted. The house itself, at 13,000 square feet, was too large for genuine human intimacy. Its long corridors and cavernous rooms seemed to swallow sound, to amplify loneliness. It was, in essence, the most beautiful, elaborate golden cage ever constructed. It was designed to keep the perceived dangers of the world out, the paparazzi, the critics, the cynics. But in doing so, it also trapped its creator inside. The fantasy was so complete, so all-encompassing, that it began to blur the lines between performance and life. Was he the benevolent king, or was he just playing a part he had written for himself? The children would come, they would laugh, and then they would leave, returning to their own lives in the real world. But he remained, the sole permanent resident of a land of make-believe, a king ruling over an empty kingdom after the carnival closed for the night. The silence after the music stopped must have been deafening, and then the world he had tried so hard to keep at bay broke through the gates. The abstract antagonist that would ultimately shatter the dream was not a person or an army. It was a whisper. It was suspicion. In the summer of 1993, the perfect world of Neverland was irrevocably cracked. The first public allegation of child sexual abuse was made against Michael Jackson. The accusation came from the father of a 13-year-old boy who had been a frequent guest at the ranch. Suddenly, the kingdom of innocence was viewed through a dark, distorted lens. Every whimsical detail of Neverland was re-examined and cast in a sinister light. The amusement park, once a symbol of generosity, was now portrayed as a lure. The sleepovers, once seen as innocent fun, were now painted as opportunities for something predatory. The very core of Jackson's public identity, his childlike persona, his love for children, was weaponized against him. The house he had built as a safe haven was now branded in the global imagination as a potential crime scene. This was the pivotal tragedy, the devastating personal event that wealth and fame could not prevent. It was a public crucifixion played out on a global stage. The media descended like vultures. Helicopters circled the property, their cameras trying to pierce the veil of privacy he had so carefully constructed. Law enforcement raided the ranch, transforming the fairy tale landscape into a place of forensic scrutiny. They searched his home, his personal belongings, his sanctuary. The invasion was total. The one place on earth he had designed to be safe was now the source of his greatest terror and humiliation. The thematic shift was brutal and absolute. The house of triumph became a house of shame. The laughter was replaced by the cold silence of legal proceedings. The floral clock at the train station continued to tick, but time was no longer standing still. It was accelerating toward a devastating conclusion. The civil suit was settled out of court, a decision Jackson reportedly made to avoid a protracted, sensationalized trial that would further damage his career. But the settlement, intended to bring closure, was widely interpreted as an admission of guilt. The damage was done. The magic was poisoned. For a few years, he tried to reclaim the dream. He continued to live at Neverland, but the shadow of 1993 never truly left. Then, in 2003, the nightmare returned, magnified. A second, more detailed set of allegations emerged, leading to a new investigation and, this time, a criminal trial. The world watched as the King of Pop became the defendant. His life, his habits, his very nature were dissected in a courtroom. Neverland was once again at the center of the storm, its layout, its bedrooms, its secret places, discussed in graphic detail and broadcast to the world. In 2005, he was acquitted on all charges, but it was a hollow victory. He had won in the court of law, but in the court of public opinion, he was forever tainted. The dream of Neverland was not just cracked, it was shattered beyond repair. The place he had created as a symbol of joy and trust had become a monument to his public torment. He felt profoundly betrayed by the legal system, by the media, and by the very people he had tried to help. His sanctuary had been violated, and he could no longer bear to live there. Shortly after the trial, Michael Jackson left Neverland. He would never return. The king had abdicated his throne, and the kingdom was left to the wind and the dust. After the king's departure, the slow, silent decay began. The fate of the house was inextricably tied to the fate of its creator. Without its master, its purpose, its animating spirit, Neverland began to wither. The staff of over 100 was dismissed. The lights in the Tudor mansion were turned off. The calliope music ceased. The joyful screams from the amusement park rides were replaced by the creak of metal contracting in the heat and the whisper of wind through the silent structures. The great emptying was a quiet, heartbreaking process. The property was shuttered, locked away from the world. The amusement park rides, once gleaming and immaculate, began to show the first signs of neglect. A fine layer of dust settled on everything. Paint began to peel. Weeds started to push through the pristine cobblestones. The once vibrant floral clock at the train station stopped, its dead flowers a grim metaphor for the end of the dream. The animals, the living soul of the kingdom, were the first to go. The giraffes, the elephants, the orangutans, all were quietly sold off or given to zoos and sanctuaries. The peaceable kingdom was disbanded. Neverland had become a ghost town, a massive 2,700-acre time capsule of a singular, spectacular failure. Then came the ultimate ironic repurposing. Michael Jackson, now living abroad as a virtual exile, fell into financial distress. The staggering upkeep costs of the empty ranch, coupled with his other debts, became an unbearable burden. In 2008, the property went into foreclosure. The magical kingdom, the priceless sanctuary of innocence, was about to be sold on the courthouse steps like any other failed investment. At the last minute, it was saved from public auction, but the savior was not a benevolent prince or a fellow dreamer. It was Colony Capital, a private equity real estate firm. This was the final, most profound irony. The deeply personal, emotional, and fantastical creation of one man's soul became a cold, hard asset on a corporate balance sheet. The pragmatic heir had arrived, and it was a faceless corporation. Colony Capital entered into a joint venture with Jackson, renaming the property Sycamore Valley Ranch, its original pre-Jackson name. It was a deliberate act of rebranding, an attempt to scrub the property of its famous, now infamous, identity. The name Neverland, with all its magic and all its darkness, was officially erased. The corporation's goal was not to preserve a dream, but to manage an investment. They saw not a kingdom, but acreage, not a fairy tale, but a potential return on equity. And yet the house survived. While many grand, idiosyncratic follies of the wealthy are torn down by their more practical successors, Neverland was too famous, too substantial, and perhaps too notorious to simply demolish. It sat in a state of suspended animation for years. The amusement park rides were eventually dismantled and removed, piece by piece. The train was taken away. The landscape was simplified. The corporation slowly and methodically stripped the property of its most whimsical, most Michael elements, preparing it for a future sale to a conventional wealthy buyer. It survived, but as a ghost of its former self, a neutered version of the original audacious vision. It was a house that time had decided not to forget, but to punish. Today, Sycamore Valley Ranch is a private estate once more. After years on the market, with an initial asking price of $100 million, it was finally sold in late 2020 for a reported $22 million, a fraction of its original valuation and barely more than what Jackson himself had paid for the undeveloped land decades earlier. The kingdom had been sold at a steep discount. Its new owner is a private billionaire, and the gates are once again closed to the public, this time for good. It is no longer a haven for sick children or a public spectacle. It is simply an immense piece of private property, its magic now a memory, its story a footnote in a real estate transaction. In the end, what is the story of Neverland really about? To find the answer, we must look past the headlines and see the universal archetype at its core. Michael Jackson's story is a modern retelling of one of literature's great American tragedies. He was, in his own way, a Jay Gatsby for the MTV generation. Like Gatsby, he was a man from humble provincial origins who rose to unimaginable heights of wealth and fame. Like Gatsby, he built an extravagant, fantastical house for a single obsessive purpose. Gatsby built his West Egg mansion to lure Daisy Buchanan from across the bay to win back a lost love. Jackson built Neverland to reclaim a lost childhood. Both men used their homes as magnificent stages, hosting lavish spectacles for crowds of people. Gatsby threw decadent parties, hoping Daisy would one day wander in. Jackson created a carnival, hoping to surround himself with the innocence he felt he had lost. Both men were profoundly lonely figures, isolated by the very grandeur they had created, and both stories end in tragedy, with the dream dissolving and the great house left as a silent, empty monument to a beautiful, doomed quest. Neverland is the West Egg mansion of the late 20th century, a symbol of the corrupting power of a perfect, unattainable dream. This story, though rooted in a specific time and a unique individual, holds a powerful mirror to our own age. Jackson's desperate need to curate a perfect world, to build a fortress against the messiness and judgment of reality, is an impulse that has become democratized in the 21st century. He did it with brick, mortar, and millions of dollars. We do it with pixels. We build our own digital Neverlands on social media. We carefully select the images, filter the imperfections, and present a narrative of a life that is happier, more successful, and more beautiful than the one we are actually living. We are all, in our own small way, the architects of a fantasy, attempting to control our own narrative, to keep the harsh realities of the world just outside the frame. The fundamental human desire to escape, to be loved, to control how we are seen is the same engine that drove the creation of that strange and wonderful kingdom in the California hills. So what is the final, enduring lesson of Neverland? It is a profound and cautionary statement about the limits of power. It teaches us that you cannot build a fortress against time. You cannot engineer innocence. You cannot buy back a childhood or wall off the world's complexities forever. A house, no matter how grand, no matter how magical, cannot heal a psychological wound. It can only encase it, decorate it, and in the end, become its grandest, most tragic mausoleum. Neverland does not stand as a monument to the king of pop, the entertainer. It stands as a haunting memorial to Michael Jackson, the man. It is a testament to the beautiful, heartbreaking folly of a boy who built a paradise to avoid growing up, and the cruel, unforgiving world that would not let him be. If you were to fly over the Santa Ynez Valley today, you would see a magnificent piece of real estate. A large house, a lake, manicured lawns, and ancient oaks. You would see no sign of a carnival, no hint of a zoo. The silence of the valley has reclaimed the space. The gates, once photographed by the world, are now just gates on a private road, leading to a private home. The story is over. The laughter has faded, and the floral clock, long removed, is finally, irrevocably still.